What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Pulse. Folks, we've reached the last episode of our three-part series on how people with autism are getting involved in the research game. Big shout out to Dr. Fakhri Shafai for making time for us. We were truly and well honored. Without further delay, here is part 3. So recently we did an advocacy series on The Pulse, and one of our episodes was on research as a form of advocacy. So we were talking about how autistic people can get involved in the studies, not just as participants, but as study designers and administrators. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Does that exist? Is that something that's happening? How does one go about getting involved with that?
I am so excited about this shift in autism research because it is happening. Remember how I was just talking about funding agencies?
Hmm.
Well, the funding agencies are also putting a priority on studies that are not consulting with autistic people, but are co-designed with autistic people, where autistic people are also co-authors on that paper. And there's a few groups that are, I think, leaders in Canada on this. I would say probably the biggest group is the Family Engagement and Research Group. They're out of McMaster and they're part of Kids Brain Health Network as well. And I actually took the course a few years ago, but it's a course for scientists and for, in this case, it's parents because we're talking about children, but the concepts go beyond that. And basically, the idea is you get matched with a scientist and you focus on what matters to you, and together you guys design a study. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful shift because it's forcing scientists to actually pay attention to what the community needs. Um, one of I have many frustrations, but one of my frustrations is that so often we say, oh, this research will help autistic people. And then you look at it and you say, how many steps removed are you from actually helping autistic people with this research? Like, you're answering a question you're interested in, but are they interested in the answer to that question? Is the answer to that question somehow going to make their lives better? And in my experience, it's a lot of hand waving. It's a lot of, oh, yeah, yeah, eventually it can be used for interventions. Well, how can it be used for interventions? Specify how the research you're doing on what they're looking at. And I'm saying this as somebody who did eye tracking research.
Hmm.
Specify how understanding what they're looking at is eventually going to lead to my life is better because of this research. And in a lot of cases, it's hand waving. The researchers say, well, we just need to know how it works first. Then we can figure out how to make an intervention. And they're not wrong. Like, that is part of the process. But
Hmm.
how many studies do we need on how it works before we actually do something about it? And in fact, that's one of the reasons I left academia and got into nonprofit knowledge translation, because there's a lot of great scientists out there. There's a lot of scientists who are doing some really cool research, but not many of them are good at explaining it. not,
Yeah.
not many of them know how to put it into layman's terms in a way that will tell an autistic person or their family member why this matters and how it's going to help them. And I think the way we get around that is with co-designed research, not collaborative research. Collaborative research is, I'm going to have a focus group with some autistic people and talk to them about this. And then I'm going to go and design a study. And then I might run the results by them. And then,
Hmm.
we'll come out with a publication about it. And, that's important. That's a great thing. But how much more important is it to be able to say, I spoke with autistic people. This is what they said they needed. And we're designing it together. We're coming up with the questions together. Um, so I'd say the Family Engagement and Research Group out of McMaster, and again, Kids Brain Health Network is part of it, so you can look that up. I'd say
Hmm.
they're probably one of the leaders in Canada. So the International Society for Autism Research, a couple of years ago, introduced this idea of the INSAR Community Collaborator Request. And essentially, it's not a request to be for an autistic person to be part of research like as a participant, but instead, it's a way that autistic people and scientists can both sign up saying, hey, we'd like to be matched about a particular topic. And so, you as an autistic person, maybe you're interested in sensory processing differences, and another researcher has said, I'm interested in sensory processing differences. And the idea is you guys can come together and hopefully co-design a study where you're involved every step of the way as an autistic person. You're a co-author, you are part of this research. And you don't have to do all of the activities, but I'm just going to read off some of the activities that you can be involved in if you so choose to go through that. So you
Yeah.
could be involved in identifying the research questions, or conducting a literature review, so reading through all the research and deciding what's important to include. You can be involved in the setting of the research objectives and hypotheses. You can design the study and make decisions on which methods you're going to use. You can be part of the data collection or part of processing and analyzing the data. You can be part of interpreting the results, and then you can be part of writing up and telling others about your results. So every step of the research you can be a part of if you're part of a group like this. But essentially, it's what I've seen, from what I've seen, this is the biggest international effort to get autistic people as co-authors, to get them involved at every level. And again, the Kids Brain Health Network, Family Engagement and Research course is doing something similar, but the INSAR is international. So I would say if you're an autistic person and you want to be involved in research, I would say look into those two groups, because you will have more opportunities to drive research if you're a part of it every step of the way. You will get to voice, how is this helping me? How is this going to help my community? Because frankly, a lot of researchers don't think in those terms. They think in, okay, what's publishable? What's unique about what I'm doing? And how
Yeah.
is that going to be something a journal is going to say, yeah, we want to talk about that. We want to publish this. Um, Knowledge translation is something that is sorely, sorely lacking in the scientific field. And I think the way we deal with that is, number one, to care about it as a group, but to also get autistic people involved at every level, because as as we know, an autistic person will stop and say, why are we doing this, or what's behind this decision? An autistic person will question things that a scientist might just assume, because we've been in this field so long. And one of the things that drives me nuts about scientists is we love to sound smart. We love to sound so intelligent, and we have all these fancy terms we use. And it's fine if that's how we want to talk to each other, fine. But we don't get to talk to other people that way and then say, oh, they can't understand my research. No, you didn't explain it well enough.
Yes, I love that. Can I ask you a follow-up question about your
That's
research? Okay,
sure.
so the eye tracking. So I remember getting really, really excited when you first told me about it. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about what that study was about.
Well, I had a few eye tracking studies. So eye tracking studies have been used for a while, and they started in the 90s, but it wasn't until a decade later, and really in this last decade, that the tools started getting really cool. I would say the first study that really made waves for eye tracking was a looking time study, meaning it was just keeping track of how long an autistic person was looking at one thing on a screen versus another. And the first study showed a movie scene, and they did this eye tracking and they followed it, and they found that an autistic person wasn't even looking at the people talking. Autistic people in this study were looking at things in the background, like there was a red balloon, and that was getting like the most attention from people during this study. And so we really started looking at looking time as an indication of what was important to the person. So for instance, these sorts of studies are what allowed us to know that high contrast items get a lot of attention. Certain colors get a lot of attention. But you know what doesn't get attention? Faces. What
Mhm.
doesn't get attention, if you force a person to look at a face, they're going to look at the mouth or the nose. They're not looking at the eyes. And if you ask autistic people why that is, there's one of two reasons that I've been told. One reason is the eyes give me no information. I don't understand what I'm supposed to see when I look at eyes. That's telling me how a person feels. But if I look at the mouth, I can tell a frown from a smile. I can tell downturned lips from another one. And I believe that might apply to you, SF.
Yeah, perhaps.
Whereas the other reason an autistic person will not look at eyes, according to what I've been told, is there's so much information there that I'm overwhelmed and I just can't handle it. I need to look at something else on the face that is simpler for me to look at, that I won't it won't be overwhelming. And
Hmm.
in some cases, they say painful. Like it's
Yeah.
painful for me to look at eyes. And so looking time studies were probably the beginning of this. What's really cool is we now also have pupillometry studies. So what that means is your pupils change depending on what you're looking at. And we all know, oh, if I look at a light, my pupils will change compared to if I go into the dark. But your pupils change depending on your internal emotional state as well. So if I'm looking at something that excites me, my pupils are going to show it versus something that I find boring. And also, we can also get an indication of how much a person understands about an emotional exchange that's happening on the screen based off of how their pupils respond to it. So if you're not very engaged with an emotional scene, your pupils aren't going to change. But if there's somebody angry on the screen, chances are your pupils are going to change. It has to do with something called mirror neurons. I'm not going to make us get into that, but essentially, when we look at something and it's an emotionally charged something, we have an emotional reaction also. And
Mhm.
pupillometry is a very cool way for us to be able to measure that objectively. Um, so some of my previous studies have looked at um, where a person's looking at on the screen, how they're responding to emotion. In my last lab, which was my postdoc lab, that my my PI, my principal investigator, my boss, basically, he was really interested in something called multisensory integration. So multisensory integration is where you take two or more senses and your brain puts it together as one event. So for instance, if I'm looking at you and you're talking, I'm both hearing you and I'm seeing you. My brain integrates those two senses together and says, oh, this is a single event. This person is talking and I'm hearing them and I'm seeing them, and this is one thing that's happening in front of me. But what some previous studies from my PI's lab have shown is that that is not occurring for autistic people all the time. In fact, there's a subset of autistic people that those two events are not lining up. So if you've ever watched TV and the audio track gets messed up somehow,
Oh,
it, yeah, so the lips
it,
aren't lining up with what the words are saying, it's
oh, it
super
drives me
annoying, right?
crazy.
It's annoying. Most of us will exit and then restart because we do
Hmm.
not want to deal with that. But what if you're an autistic person and that's how you're experiencing life? Or maybe it's only when you're overwhelmed or there's other things going on. But if that's what's happening for you on a regular basis, no wonder you're not looking at faces, because it's actually confusing the information. Instead, I'm just going to focus on what you hear. In fact, I had one autistic person look at me and he said, look, lady, I can either look at you or I can listen to you. Don't ask me to do both. Um, He was great. Um,
Direct.
I love it. It's one of my favorite parts of working with autistic people is there's no BS. People, you know where you stand immediately, and I love it. Um, so I part of that research from that lab is really looking at uh, how do we put that information together. And so I did a study where we had people saying a particular line. The dogs are lying by the door. I know it sounds stupid, and it is, but it was the line that was being said, and they had actually created this database with actors who were saying these lines at different intensities of anger, of sadness, of happy, of surprise, of fear. And so we could look at, okay, how is the person responding to a fearful stimulus versus an angry one versus a happy one, and what are
Oh,
their pupils doing in response to this? And then what happens if we change the timing? So what if there about a half second delay between the audio and the visual? What does that do? And then what happens if we change the timing and the audio and the visual aren't matching? Meaning I have a happy actor who's screaming audio
oh my
is
gosh.
angry. And the idea is to try and understand exactly at what point and what the time difference is for an autistic person to be able to tell those two apart. So if I ask, did this person sound angry? Are you placing um, more focus on their face, or are you actually able to say, no, I'm only paying attention to the voice, and it doesn't matter how much of an offset there is? Now, you might say, what's the purpose of that, Fakhri? What does this tell us? That whole question I said before of why does this matter? Well, if we understand which emotions are more problematic for autistic people, and we understand what the timing difference is for them, we can create training programs that will help a person better be able to recognize happiness from sadness or whatever the case may be. Again, that's a few steps away, but
Mhm.
that's kind of the point of research is you ask these questions, you try and figure it out, and then you say, okay, now what do we do with it? How do we make it useful? um, I just got tired of asking the first question, and I just want to skip to how do we make it useful. So that's why I left academia and went into knowledge translation, because as I mentioned, there's some incredible scientists out there. I've worked with a lot of them. There's amazing scientists and human beings out there, and I don't need to recreate their research. What I need to do is explain their research in a way that is useful for the community that I care about, which is the autism community.
That does it for this week's episode of The Pulse. Big thank you to Dr. Fakhri Shafai for lending us her time and expertise. We look forward to connecting with her in the future to discuss new and exciting research. As always, if you have questions or ideas you'd like us to discuss, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, send an email to voa@pacificautismfamily.com. We look forward to more of your great questions. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.